Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. And for the record, yes, I am Donald McElligott, VP of Compliance Supervision at Global Relay. My background, I'm 11 years at Global Relay, but my background has been working with the compliance technology going back to when we were just using keywords and random sampling on regular old messages. That was the state of the universe that we had. I've met a number of people here that I've seen throughout different parts of my career who were all doing the same thing back in the day, which was trying to figure out how to build these lexicons and build these keywords so we can actually find risk and identify what's going on. So I want to do a little bit of memory lane here and talk about how we got to where we are with AI, because AI gets thrown around everywhere in this industry. And when it comes to specifically surveillance, there's things AI does well and things that it no longer does, that like the preconceptions people have about how AI works in surveillance. And that's what I want to talk about here. As we go through this, at the end I'm going to get through some of the misconceptions or myths, as we like to say. So the history of lexicons and how this all started. In the early days, we just endlessly poured over refining keywords, figuring out how to reduce noise, figuring out what we could do to identify the risks that we wanted to get. It was painful, it was annoying, and in the end, throughout most of that, we were told down the road there was this vision of AI that was going to replace the lexicon, that someday we'd have this tool that's going to throw away your lexicon and you'll be able to do this with an AI. And it never really got here. As it turns out, after you chased what you thought you would chase, it didn't actually work. It was back to the lexicon and random sample event. As it is today, what we were doing initially for AI, that's not what we're doing now. It changed over the years. So what's happened is the approach we took back then has built a lot of preconceptions about how it works today. And that's really what I wanted to talk about here. As you go through the early stages of AI, it was a machine learning exercise. It was gather your data, maybe even make a duplicate copy of your data, put it into some system, and you could run it through various algorithms and train it and show it example after example, and at some point it was going to go out and find the risk for you. It was very expensive. It took a lot of resources, took a lot of time, took a lot of energy, and in the end it left us back in square one, because it really was just trading the pain of refining lexicons for the pain of using a model that you trained over and over again. It was one pain for another. In the end, you stuck with your lexicon or you used whatever technology you had, and if you were lucky, and I think I'm optimistic on this, at 25 false positives for every one that you actually found that was a risk, we would talk to people as we would go through, onboarding them onto technology, and they'd be telling me, yeah, the best tool I have in my toolbox is my random sample policy, because that's the one that's finding me the most risk. And that was the sad state we were in, but it was the state. It turned the industry and the vendors onto the idea that the way we're going to fix this is we're going to reduce the noise. And AI got deployed as a noise reduction technology. The focus became really an obsession. That the whole focus of the industry shifted to how are we going to reduce all this noise? We lost sight of the idea that it's not about reducing noise. We're supposed to be finding risk with these things, and all we've been doing over the last 5 years or so is focus on get rid of these false positives. So it's a big shift in approach. It's a big shift in attitude. Around 2024, AI breaks through. And for us in the outside world who weren't steeped in this stuff, it kind of burst onto the scene like an overnight success, that you could go on to ChatGPT and you could talk to a bot like it was a human, and it had a human-like intelligence. It came out of nowhere. Obviously, a lot of research and work went into getting to that point, but all of a sudden, here it was, as a tool that you can talk to intelligently, and it can do things that maybe this could help us in surveillance. And I was the first one, having been through this so many times, to say, here we go again. It's another approach with AI that's going to promise to replace the lexicon. This is the first time me, even as a skeptic, has to admit we finally have the tool that can do this. We finally have a thing that can go out there and identify risk and really give us some value without us killing ourselves trying to train this thing and build it up and feed it example after example. The possibility was there. So the approach or the current state of things where we are now is this. Every vendor has to have an AI strategy. We all have to figure out what are we going to do to incorporate this new AI into what we're doing. There's as many strategies as there are vendors. We all have to figure out how we're going to do this. Over time, what we discovered, or we see this as a way to approach this, it's a little bit different. In the early days, the idea was if I use enough data, if I train this thing properly, if I feed it examples, if I use financial technology and information, I'll be able to get a system that can work for me and do this specific task. And over here out of left field comes a general language model that just has human-like intelligence, that you can just basically ask it a question. You could ask it to do a task, and it can do it. It can figure this stuff out. It has some challenges, but it brought us to a new place. And just to kind of cover that journey a little bit, we started out with these machine learning, very specialized tools. Train, 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 example, 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 and if you do it right, you'll get a reasonable result. Effective on a small scale. There's still occasions to use tools like this, a machine learning algorithm to do a very simple, specific task. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not the be-all, end-all solution. Fast forward a little bit, these models get bigger, more sophisticated. They become these deep learning models. There's new technology even put into training these things to where they get a little more sophisticated. But they're still fairly specialized, and it's still an exercise in training and targeting it for specifically what you want to do. And if you miss the target, you miss your result. Scale those up massively, and you get a large language model. You get this general intelligence that you can talk to. In fact, you can go to the general intelligence and ask it to describe itself to you and how it works and how it differs from these other things, which is one of the things I do, is kind of ask it, how does this really work? And without getting terribly complicated, it is a more massively scaled version of these deep learning models. There's challenges to using them, but this is the idea that you have basically this agent that can work on your behalf and help you out. And that takes us to the next bit of technology buzzword stuff that comes out, is generative and agentic AI. We're kind of working through this as we think about how to talk about our solution to our customers. Generative AI has been talked about with ChatGPT, that's the G. That's the creation, that's, build me something, write me something, create something for me, as opposed to the agentic AI, which is, I have a task, I want this task done repeatedly. It takes a little bit of intelligence, but it's more robotic. Just do this task on this level. And the real need here isn't one or the other, but a combination of both. To actually do this right, you need the agent to work on its own and make some decisions and process a workflow, but you also need the generative part to explain and to kind of identify what it found and how it got there. We have to be transparent about this stuff, so you need both. The way we're thinking about it, and the way we kind of put it together, it's a bit like a quadrant idea of, one axis is how good are you at agentic, how sophisticated along that line, and the other is how creative, how generative you are. And there's places for both. There's an area where you need an agent that's not thinking too much, it's just doing a task, and there's times where you want to chat with a chatbot and ask it some things. But the sweet spot tends to be in the upper right, where you want both. You want the thing that can do the task for you, but also smart enough to be able to engage in the explanation and the investigation of that stuff. So that's where we're going with this stuff. I kind of set the table, and now I want to get into some of the misconceptions that are out there, because a lot of this was learned by hard experience by a lot of us in this room, having worked with AI over the years. And I see it when I present our AI solution to customers. The questions they have come from that mindset of, for instance, obviously you have to train it. Are you training it on my data? Is it learning from my reviewers? Is it picking up what I'm telling it? It's the kind of answer that's difficult to say technologically, because it gets into the weeds of how an LLM works, but the short version is it just knows. You don't have to train it, it's intelligent. It's been trained on all of the regulatory data, it's been trained on legal information, it's an expert in all of these things. You can ask it to explain some of these risks to you, and it will. It knows this stuff. So you kind of have to see it in action to understand that it already knows this stuff. And if you kind of test it and prove it, it'll let you realize that, yeah, this is a way to figure this stuff out. It doesn't need what it needs is careful instructions. It needs you to explain the risk very clearly. It needs you to explain the task you want it to do very clearly. If you get the instructions wrong, you get into the areas where it's wandering, or it's hallucinating, or it's doing those things. But if you keep it on track and you give it very clear, specific prompts and instructions, it will produce the results you want, and they'll be repeatable. Next, I want to talk about the expense. This isn't so much of a myth as, again, it's the experience we've all had over the past years of what AI represented. It was a massive data manipulation effort. It was building data lakes. It was processing and structuring data. It was storage costs. It was algorithms running over large amounts of data. Very heavy, intensive work. It also involved a lot of human resources to go over and review that result and keep training it and improving it. It's just lessons learned the hard way. And now as these models get bigger, it's hardware. It's you got to run this stuff on, you know, a massive data center with huge GPUs at massive energy costs and cooling costs, et cetera. So how do you get around that? Well, the key approaches to doing that is to tackle both sides of that equation. On the data storage side, if you have an archive that's already structuring your data, if you have an efficient storage system that allows you to process this data without having to transform it or move it or copy it, that's a big chunk of the battle right there. You don't want to spend a fortune on public cloud vendors who are going to charge you for duplicating all that storage. And on the processing side, you want to have the hardware accessible to your data. So you want that in-house, you want large GPU infrastructure. When you make the right investment in that hardware and you bring it in close proximity to the data, you also keep a lid on all the processing costs. So putting that together makes this affordable. And we've seen this ourselves. We've seen the costs that were, you know, double-digit per user expenses in terms of costs to do any kind of supervision. It's now down to the low single digits. It's now down to, you know, comparable to what we saw in the early days of Lexicon. It's getting to that point. The other area that's kind of an obvious logical jump is how is it going to understand my business? And every customer I talk to is doing things a little bit differently. There's no two firms out here that are in the exact same situation. So, you know, even within the financial world, there's the brokers, the traders, the dealers, you know, investment advisors. Whatever you're doing, there's a little bit of a different twist to what your specific business does. This is where the prompting and the knowledge of the LLM come in. They really do understand the different businesses. You can ask an LLM, these really large, sophisticated ones, to explain what a particular business is like and what the risks would be for that business, and it'll tell you, and it'll be pretty accurate about what that is. So it understands the context. Being specialized to finance is an advantage to an extent that you understand financial jargon and lingo and the way traders talk. But if you work with the really sophisticated models, not only does it understand it, you could ask it to write you an example of a trader communication, and it does a pretty good job. It knows how traders talk. It can mimic what they do. It really does know that. The other knowledge it has, these really large language models know everything about everything, which it sounds silly to say, but it really does. That comes in handy because a lot of times the conversation might be something that's a violation or a risk, but they're talking in terms of like cultural references or things that have nothing to do with finance. So if you don't have the broader knowledge, you're missing things. So it's not only a liability to be general, it's an advantage to have that kind of depth. Number 4, the black box. The other big question we get every time we present this to customers: what are the regulators going to say? How am I going to explain this when a regulator comes in, when that FINRA examiner is asking me, what are you doing? Why did this flag and not that? That's a lot on the vendors. That's something we have to take responsibility for when we're developing these solutions. And we have an advantage that we have a number of former regulators that work with us who are able to condition us this way. I've also personally been demoing to FINRA examiners, to SEC. We meet with these regulators because they want to know what's going on. Every time we go to these forums, we're all hungry for, like, what are the regulators saying? What's the latest news? What's the latest release of what they're doing? So you want to have that feedback. We were extremely encouraged when we met them face to face because they fully acknowledge AI is better than Lexicon. This is going to replace it. Everyone's going to use AI. That's not in question anymore. It's how are we going to do it and do it the right way. And they had very good guidance for us around how to be transparent and how to do this right. Number 1 is being upfront with the technology you're giving to customers. The way they put it, the examiners, the quote they had for me was, we're going to come into your customer's site and we're going to ask them to show us what they do and show us how it works. If they can't tell me what they're using and they don't have documentation that explains how it works, that exam's not going to go so well for them because we're going to dig in and see what they're doing. We might even discount what they're saying they're doing because they're using a tool they don't understand. So that puts the onus back on us. As the vendors, we have to provide that documentation. We have to provide enough knowledge so that when you are in front of that question, you can answer it and you can provide those documents. How is that model trained? How does it work? How is it tested? We even help customers develop their own testing protocols so that they can do some you don't have to take our word for it. We have to enable you to do this yourself. So that goes a long way. There's also auditability. The LLM can't just give you an answer. It can't just say, I think this is a risk and this is the risk. It's got to explain why it thinks it's a risk. It's got to identify a bit of a breadcrumb trail. I found these key phrases. I related it to this risk as you defined it. I considered these other risks and rejected them. Like, it has to have that kind of evidence trail so that when you do have to dig into why this and not that, you have an answer for it. And that's important. If your solution's not giving you that kind of information, you're exposed as to, it becomes a black box if you don't have that audit trail. Last one, and they touched on this a little bit in the previous panel, right? AI is going to replace us all. What's going to happen in this industry? Good news on this front, I think, and you can rest assured, humans aren't going anywhere in this loop because the human interaction with this tool is the key. I would put it the other way. I think the job of compliance people, especially the frontline reviewers and the technology folks, let's face it, it was getting a little tedious to have to go through 500 false positives and garbage to hope you find those 5 or 10 that might be worth spending a little time on. Your job became a treasure hunter instead of a value to the organization, defining risk or revealing risk. That job is going to get more interactive. Your queue isn't going to be 500 messages of mostly garbage. It's going to be 40 messages, and they're all going to be relevant. They're all going to be risks that you have to pay attention to. And we're seeing this in live trials. We're seeing this with customers that are starting to use our tool. It's uncovering things. It's surprising us, some of the things it uncovers. It's been very encouraging to see how that's developed. A little bit about where this is going and what lies ahead. The goal is to initially just satisfy, when I review a message, I want to identify risk, but the tools that do that are also tools that can allow you access to more and more of the data. You're sitting on a database, an archive, with every bit of communication across your entire organization. If you're doing it right, as you analyze this data, you also vectorize it. Vectorizing the data is kind of the way you index it so an LLM can have access to it. If you have an LLM-like entity that can fully access your entire archive, you can ask it literally anything. The potential becomes enormous. So you already have this data. You now have the potential to uncover things in that data, the intelligence that's there, the way you never could before. We're not even sure what kind of use cases are going to bubble out of this, but we're building that technology so that the entire archive will be referenced. You'll have a chat with a chatbot that can answer you based on the messages in your archive. So there's a ton of intelligence already in there. You just don't have access to it right now. It's accessible once you vectorize it all and you let an AI get access to that. So the firms that find that path are going to be the ones that have not only better risk controls, but they'll have a competitive advantage. They're going to be able to use that for other strategy development across an organization. The archive goes from being kind of that necessary evil cost to something you can leverage going forward. So last slide, just some final thoughts to kind of sum things up for everything. I think what I'll leave it as, this is going to be a teamwork approach. Going forward, we're going to have the humans that understand the technology working with the AI tools that do this. Somebody's question earlier was spot on, like what should a compliance person be working on to stay relevant in this industry? It's going to be understanding how do you communicate with a large language model that has access to the data. And when you can innovate ways to pull valuable knowledge out of that data, you're going to be a valuable resource yourself. So I think that's where we're headed. With that, I'll say thank you, everyone. And if anyone has any questions, we have a few seconds left, or I'm at the booth right outside. You can come over and see us out there.
Thank you for this session.
Yeah.
I have observed in my experience, trying to implement AI-based solutions for perhaps alert reduction and intelligent adjudication, that not all vendors have solutions which are created equal, right? Most vendors, whether existing at your institution or new, they want to jump into the AI/ML bandwagon and might not be having solutions which are fit for purpose. Now, in many cases, professionals at the banking institution might not be as adept in machine learning or AI, and hence would not know any better than what is being provided. So in those instances, isn't a bank setting themselves up for failure if you're adopting a machine learning or AI solution without fully understanding what questions to ask so that we are evaluating risks before venturing to such a endeavor?
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that, and it comes up in every. I do 4 or 5 sales discussions a day now with existing customers that aren't using AI yet and prospects, and it's a huge concern that the lack of understanding. It's very hard to get a grip of this. I mean, the answer is transparency, transparency, transparency. The vendors, it's on your vendor to clearly explain what they're using at every step. Even at Global Relay, there's like 7 or 8 different models doing different things to your data. We have to be completely clear about every single one of those. How was it built? Who built it? They're not all ours. We use ones that are available. What's the pedigree of that model? Where did it come from? How was it trained? If they can't provide all of that history of how they got there, that's the big warning sign. It has to be a partnership. This kind of technology requires the vendors to work more closely than they ever have with the folks that they're supporting. It has to be a two-way street. If you have doubts about what they're doing or you uncover things that they didn't fully explain, yeah, that's a breakdown in that communication, and that shouldn't happen. That has to be a partnership. Anyone else?
Hi. Thank you for your. Thank you for the talk. I have a question for you. I'm wondering, like, when you've been describing what AI can do, and agentic AI could, where you have those agents doing specific tasks.
Right.
But how far do you think we are from the stage where AI can, help with governance itself, where where it decides, okay, it can tag this data as being low risk, this data as being high risk, or it can, create tags in model. So that data can be used by an agent that uses structured data, right? But the model that precedes it tags it, which human beings do today.
Yeah.
So how far do you think we are from that?
And like 2 years ago, if you asked me that, I would say, who knows when? Like, it's so far off in the future, and then all of a sudden, boom, we've got intelligent agents we can talk to, and they function. So, yeah, it's a fool's game to try to guess exactly when. I think the big breakthrough, what's going to take a little time, is the intelligence that AI is applying now to this surveillance solution is kind of single message at a time and building its data element by element. The product of that exercise builds more data that could then be incorporated, and that data kind of builds on itself to where eventually you'll have models that can understand the behavioral patterns that those initial one-off events are putting together. So it's like, first we have to get to the intelligent building of message by message what's going on. Now I can start to roll that up into, here's a human that's done a series of events, and that's created a risk profile now that's part of a bigger behavior. So we've got to crawl before we can get to that stage, but we took a huge leap with the ability to do what we're doing today. Yeah, that's made that possible. I think we're time. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.